The 911 call was for a stolen car, my car. The HOA president stood on my porch with a smirk as two police cruisers screeched to a halt. She thought her petty bylaws were the ultimate authority. She was about to learn the hard way that I play by a different set of rules. My name is Frank Dillon, and this is what happens when you weaponize a community against the wrong neighbor. Let me rewind. After 30 years on the force, my wife Gina and I bought this house for the silence. The name on my badge says Chief, but around here in this quiet little slice of suburbia, I'm just Frank. I like it that way. Quiet, no press. I opted out of the HOA directory and kept my rank off the welcome email. After 3 decades of city noise, city crime, and city politics, all I wanted was to mow my lawn on Saturdays and maybe finally get around to rebuilding the carburetor on my dad's car. It came with a 2-car garage, a small yard, and a homeowners association run by a woman with a smile as tight as a guitar string. Her name was Karen Truman. She treated herself like a high priestess of suburban order. The car. That's where it all started. It's a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, candy apple red. It's not just a car, it's the last piece of my father I have left. He bought it new, paid cash, and spent every Sunday polishing the chrome until you could see your soul in it. When he passed, he left it to me. I hadn't turned it over in years until last month. It waits under a soft gray cover for a day with more time than paperwork. To me, it's a memory, a promise I made to my father to get her roaring again. To Karen Truman, it was an outrage. An unregistered, non-operational vehicle parked in plain sight. A violation of Section 8, Paragraph 3, Subsection C. The rule, as she saw it, was about appearances, not sentiment. She first brought it up at the annual welcome barbecue, cornering me by the potato salad, holding a clipboard like a weapon. Her son, George, a kid with a weak chin and the entitled slouch of someone who's never worked a day in his life, stood behind her, eyeing the Mustang in my open garage. "Mr. Dillon," she said, her voice a low hum of disapproval. "That vehicle, it's been stationary for 3 weeks. The bylaws are quite clear." I gave her a polite smile. "It's a project car, Mrs. Truman. A classic." George chimed in, his voice cracking with a feigned expertise. "A Boss 429. That's a real Carcraft motor, right?" I nodded, surprised he knew. "That's right. Built off-site," I said. "Built right." He took a step closer. "You ever think about selling it?" Karen put a hand on his chest, stopping him cold. "George, we're discussing a violation, not making a purchase." Her eyes flicked from me to the car, calculating. She wasn't seeing a problem to solve, but an opportunity to seize. I told her I'd look into the bylaws. "You have 7 days," she added, sweet as bleach. "Or we handle it through the association." Paperwork is very persuasive. To the HOA president, Karen Truman, it was an unregistered eyesore. The official notices started. Petty, ridiculous stuff. One late fee carried the treasurer's signature misspelled. The HOA portal showed no such notice had ever been issued. An identical late fee hit Mrs. Alvarez, our 78-year-old widow, with a threat to put a lien on her house over a $25 balance she didn't owe. The notices started under my wiper, then taped to my front door. But then she escalated. Drastically. This morning, I was woken up not by my alarm clock, but by the sound of a fist hammering on my front door. It was 7 a.m. The sun was barely up. Gina was already awake, sitting at her command center in our home office, a cup of tea steaming next to her triple monitor setup. She's the brains of our little operation. I'm the boots on the ground. She's the eye in the sky. She looked over at me, one eyebrow raised. "Showtime," she mouthed. I nodded, pulling on a pair of jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. I opened the door to find Karen Truman standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, a smug little smile playing on her lips. George was behind her, looking nervous but excited, like a kid about to get a puppy he didn't have to take care of. "Frank," she said, dropping the Mr. Dillon for a more condescending familiarity. "I'm afraid we've reached the end of the line. Your vehicle is being impounded." I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms. I'm a big guy, and I made sure to take up as much space as possible. "Is that so, Karen? On what grounds?" She tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. Violation 8.3C. And as it turns out, I had a little chat with a friend at the DMV. This vehicle has no current registration. It's essentially abandoned property on public view. I took the liberty of reporting a stolen vehicle being stored at this address. The police are on their way. My blood ran cold for a second. Not because I was scared, but because of the sheer, breathtaking audacity. She'd called 911. She'd reported a stolen car, my father's car, to have it towed. Also, her layabout son could probably get his greasy hands on it. I felt a slow, cold anger building in my chest, but I kept my face calm. That's the first rule of the job. Never let them see you sweat. You called the police? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You tied up an emergency line for a bylaw dispute? George puffed out his chest, a pathetic attempt at intimidation. It's not just a dispute, it's the law. Right on cue, two patrol cars came screaming around the corner, lights flashing. Four officers spilled out fast, two from each unit. I recognized them immediately, a young rookie named Miller and his training officer, a seasoned sergeant named Davis. I knew them both well. I'd personally pinned Miller's badge on him at his academy graduation 6 months ago. Sergeant Davis walked up the driveway, his hand resting casually but purposefully on his service weapon. He was all business. Sir, we received a call about a stolen vehicle at this location. He looked past me to the Mustang under its cover. Karen stepped forward, pointing dramatically as if she were in a courtroom drama. That's it, officer. A vintage Ford Mustang. It was reported stolen in the city last week. This man is hiding it. Miller, the rookie, looked uncomfortable. His eyes darted from Karen to me to the car. He was trying to process the scene, trying to do his job by the book, but his gut was likely telling him something was off. Davis kept his eyes locked on me. Sir, I'm going to need to see your identification and any paperwork you have for the vehicle. I nodded slowly. I reached for my back pocket, and for a split second, I saw Miller's hand twitch toward his weapon. He was green, nervous. I moved slowly, deliberately. I pulled out my wallet. Karen's smile widened into a triumphant grin. She thought she had me. She thought she was about to witness me being cuffed on my own porch. I didn't pull out my driver's license. I flipped the wallet open to my badge. The gold shield caught the morning sun, flashing brilliantly. Sergeant Davis, I said, my voice flat and even. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Davis squinted, taking a step closer. His eyes widened as he recognized the shield. The color drained from his face. He snapped to attention, his posture becoming ramrod straight. Chief Dillon, he stammered. Sir, I had no idea. Miller looked like he'd seen a ghost. His jaw was on the floor. He looked from the badge to my face to Davis and back again. The gears were turning, clicking into place with a horrifying clink. He finally managed to say one word, a choked whisper. Chief. Karen's smug smile vanished. It melted off her face, replaced by a mask of confusion and dawning horror. George just looked lost, his bravado evaporating in the morning air. I kept my eyes on Davis, but I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Sergeant, it seems Mrs. Truman here has made a false report. A criminal false report and misuse of 911. You pulled units from real calls for this, Mrs. Truman. I turned my head slightly, my eyes locking with Karen's. The predator had become the prey. She saw the quiet, professional anger in my face, and she knew in that instant that she had kicked a hornet's nest. She had tried to use my own department against me, but she didn't just fail, she'd shown her hand. And in doing so, she'd started a war she had no idea how to fight. The game had changed, and the real investigation was just beginning. The question was, what would Karen do now that her first move failed so spectacularly? The fallout from the 911 ambush was immediate but quiet. Sergeant Davis apologized profusely. I told him he was just doing his job and to file a detailed report on the false alarm, flagging Karen Truman's name in the system for misuse of emergency services. The patrol cars rolled away, curtains in neighboring windows twitched, and Karen and George's intended victory lap became a humiliating retreat. George postured for a moment before Davis's palm dropped toward his sidearm, a silent, authoritative gesture that made both of them back up instantly as neighbors' phones began to rise. They scurried away without another word. That evening, Gina and I sat in the kitchen. She had a satellite map of the neighborhood on her laptop, with little red dots marking the homes of the HOA board members. "She's not going to stop, you know," Gina said, sipping her wine. "People like that don't back down. They double down." I knew she was right. I'd seen it 1,000 times on the job. Bullies only understand one thing: overwhelming force. But I couldn't use the force of the department. This was my neighborhood, my home. I had to play by a different set of rules. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was intelligence. Every fake ticket, every drone flight was a data point. Gina was tracking it all. We learned her methods, her arrogance. The next phase of Karen's campaign was a war of 1,000 paper cuts. It was death by petty harassment. The first fake ticket appeared on the Mustang's windshield the next day. It was beautifully printed on heavy cardstock with the HI logo embossed at the top. It cited excessive Polish glare with a $50 fine. Creative. I imagined the next one would be for first-degree waxing. I took it inside and examined it under a desk lamp. The font was a standard Times New Roman, but the toner was cheap. It flaked a little when I creased the paper. Gina scanned it. "The QR code for payment links to an unregistered payment portal," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Sloppy. I filed the ticket in a new folder I'd labeled Truman. A few days later, chalk lines appeared on my driveway. Not just for the tires, but a complete, meticulous outline of the entire car with little arrows pointing to it and the words "violation area" stenciled in bright pink. It was childish, but also deeply invasive. Someone had been on my property in the middle of the night, kneeling on my concrete. I got out a tape measure. The city ordinance requires a vehicle to be parked at least 5 feet from the public sidewalk. My car was parked at 6.5 feet. Her chalk lines were deliberately drawn to create the illusion that I was over the line. I took photos, logged them meticulously, and then washed the chalk away with a garden hose. Neighbor Tony, who was out walking his beagle, shook his head. "She's a piece of work, that one," he muttered. Last year, she tried to fine me because my garden gnome was non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetic standards. The drone was the next escalation. It was a small consumer-grade quadcopter, but it was relentless. At dawn, it hovered by our bedroom window, a black, unblinking eye. It buzzed Gina in the garden, shadowed me at the mailbox. A constant, buzzing, high-tech test. This was Gina's territory. DJI Mavic 3, she announced one afternoon, not even looking up from her screen. Signal originates from 114 Willow Lane, the Truman residence. It's registered to George. She cracked a rare, dangerous smile. And its flight path has crossed our property lines 17 times in the last 2 days and has hovered directly over our windows. State peeping and nuisance laws don't love that. It was time for some small, legal counterpranks. I wasn't going to sink to her level, but I wasn't going to be a passive victim either. My response had to be methodical, legal, and just a little bit sarcastic. The first was the sprinklers. I reprogrammed my irrigation system. The next time the drone made a low pass over the Mustang, 3 sprinkler heads popped up and fired a coordinated, high-pressure volley of water directly at it. The drone sputtered, wobbled, and made a hasty retreat, dripping all the way back to the Truman house. It didn't come back for 2 days. Next, I took a page from her own book, the bylaws. I spent a Saturday morning reading the entire 100-page document. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense, full of rules about everything from the color of your mailbox to the species of your shrubs. Tucked away in the landscaping section was a clause requiring all front-facing flora to be native to the state. Karen Truman's prize-winning, perfectly manicured rose bushes, the ones that had 1 yard of the month 3 times in a row, were a French hybrid. They were not, in any way, native. I filed an official, anonymous complaint through the HOA's online portal, complete with photographic evidence and a link to the state's agricultural website. 2 weeks later, a landscaping crew arrived at her house and, to her shrieking protests, dug up every single one of her precious roses. That's when the game changed. My final countermove was the most passive-aggressive. I bought a new, even bigger, even softer car cover for the Mustang, but this one was custom printed. On the side, in giant, friendly 2-foot-high letters, it said, "Project in Progress." Ask me about it. It turned her symbol of my noncompliance into a friendly neighborhood conversation piece. People would stop and ask. I'd tell them about my dad, about the engine, about how I hoped to have it running by spring. I was turning her weapon against her, using it to build goodwill with the very neighbors she was trying to turn on me. But all of this was just a game, a suburban Cold War. It was annoying, but it wasn't dangerous. That changed when they stopped playing with paper cuts and stole a man's livelihood. That changed when neighbor Tony's truck disappeared. It was a 20-year-old Ford F-150, rusted in places, but it was his entire business. He was a handyman, and all his tools were in the back. He came to my door one morning, looking panicked. "Frank, it's gone. My truck. I parked it right there last night. Now it's just gone." There was no broken glass, no sign of a struggle, just an empty space at the curb. He said he'd gotten an HOA violation notice a week ago for a small oil leak on the pavement, a spot no bigger than a quarter. He'd cleaned it up, but the notice said if it wasn't rectified, the vehicle could be towed. He thought it was just a threat. I made some quiet calls. The truck wasn't in the city impound lot. None of the major local towing companies had a record of it. It had simply vanished. Gina, meanwhile, was digging. She cross-referenced HOA complaints with police reports. Over the last year, a pattern emerged. 10 other residents had reported vehicles towed for minor, often bogus HOA violations. The cars were never recovered. They were all older models, nothing flashy, but all of them were owned outright, no pesky lien holders to notify. And every single tow had been authorized by the same small company, Reliable Roadside Recovery, a company that, according to its business license, was owned by a holding corporation. And that holding corporation was owned by a much larger firm, Oakwood Development Group, the same developer that was currently building the new multi-million-dollar Phase 4 of our subdivision. A project that had been controversially fast-tracked by Karen Truman and the HOA board. The petty harassment wasn't just petty anymore. It was a cover for something much bigger. My Mustang wasn't the prize. It was the excuse. They were running a shakedown, using the HOA bylaws as a legal crowbar to steal cars. The conspiracy ran deeper than I could have imagined, and I had a sickening feeling I knew exactly where they were going. The discovery of the tow ring shakedown changed everything. This was no longer a spat with a power-tripping HOA president. It was a criminal conspiracy. Neighbor Tony was heartbroken over his truck and furious. All my tools, Frank. My ladders, my saws. That's how I make a living. I saw the desperation in his eyes, and it solidified my resolve. Karen Truman and her cronies had crossed a line from petty tyranny to grand larceny. My world-weary cynicism was being burned away by a cold, hard anger. This was my watch, and I wouldn't stand by while people like Tony got hit. Gina worked her magic. She pulled the corporate filings for Reliable Roadside Recovery. It was a ghost company, a single post office box for an address and a burner phone for a contact number. But the payments to the company came from Oakwood Development. And more importantly, Gina dug into the tow company's GPS data using a backdoor she had from an old cybercrime case. Most of their tows ended in one location, a sprawling, anonymous self-storage facility out by the county line called Secure Store. "They're not taking them to a scrapyard," she said, pointing at a cluster of data points on the screen. "They're taking them here, multiple trips a week, always after midnight." It was a classic car theft playbook. Tow the vehicle, stick it in a secure location to cool off, swap the vehicle identification number and plates, and then sell it clean to an unsuspecting buyer or chop it for parts. The developer connection was the missing piece. Oakwood likely needed a fleet of work trucks for their new construction phase. And what's cheaper than buying them? Stealing them from the very neighborhood they were building in, using their puppet HOA as the muscle. It was disgustingly efficient. I couldn't use a full police task force. Not yet. An official investigation would tip them off, and they'd scatter like cockroaches. This needed a quiet touch. I called in one person I trusted implicitly, Sergeant Davis. He still felt guilty about the 911 call and was eager to make things right. I met him and Gina in my garage, the red Mustang standing silent witness. This is completely off the books, I told him. No warrants, no official reports. We're just three concerned citizens going for a look. Davis nodded, his face grim. Whatever you need, Chief. The plan was simple. We needed to get inside that storage facility and, ideally, inside one of their units. Gina had already hacked Secure Store's pathetic security system, giving her access to their gate logs and surveillance cameras. She identified the unit the tow trucks visited most often, C-17. Davis and I would go in. We took my personal, beat-up pickup truck, not my department-issued SUV. Davis unscrewed the license plates in my driveway and swapped them with a set from an old junked car he had on his property. They were department test plates, on loan, legally valid for on-road vehicle testing during plainclothes operations. It was a small detail, but in this line of work, small details keep you out of trouble. We drove to Secure Store after dark. The place was a maze of identical corrugated steel doors under the harsh glare of sodium vapor lamps. Gina crackled in our ears through a small comms device. Gate camera is on a 5-minute loop. Northwest corner is a blind spot. You've got 20 minutes. The gate groaned open as she bypassed the system remotely. We slipped inside the dark compound and parked in the blind spot. The air was cold and smelled of dust and rust. We found Unit C-17 at the end of a long, dark row. It had a heavy-duty padlock on it. Davis pulled a small toolkit from his jacket. He was an old-school cop who'd come up when knowing how to pick a lock was as important as knowing how to shoot. He went to work, his movements quick and professional. I stood watch, listening to the silence, every distant sound making the hair on my arms stand up. After a tense minute, the lock clicked open. Davis slid the heavy door up just enough for us to slip underneath. He followed me in, and we pulled it shut behind us, plunging us into absolute darkness. I clicked on a small pen light. The beam cut through the dark, revealing the truth. It was a chop shop. Tony's F-150 was there, parked in the back, but it was already being stripped. The doors were off, the engine block hoisted on a chain. Dozens of license plates from 5 different states lined the wall. On a makeshift bench under a dim work lamp sat a stack of paperwork. I walked over, my light tracing over the documents. They were forged tow authorizations. Each one detailed a bogus HOA violation, oil stains, flat tires, expired tags, and was signed at the bottom. Most of the signatures were a messy scrawl, but one, on a form authorizing the tow of a 10-year-old minivan, was perfectly, chillingly clear. It was Karen Truman's elegant, looping signature. But the real prize was underneath that stack. It was a binder full of blank vehicle titles and a professional-grade printing kit for creating new VIN plates. This was a sophisticated operation. And sitting right next to the printer was a receipt book. It detailed payments made to an individual for consulting services. The payments were weekly, always in cash, and always signed for by the same person, Barry Jenkins, the treasurer of our HOA. Davis let out a low whistle. They've got the whole board in on it. Not the whole board, I said, thinking. Just the ones who handle the money and the enforcement. Karen and her treasurer, Barry. We photographed everything with our phones. The cars, plates, the forged documents, the receipt book. We didn't take a single thing. We had the whole conspiracy laid out, from petty fines to industrial-scale car theft. We worked quickly, the minutes ticking by. Gina's voice came over the comms. Guards finishing his round. You need to be out of there in 2 minutes. We slipped back out, replaced the lock exactly as we'd found it, and were driving away before the guard's golf cart even turned down our aisle. Driving back home, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a grim sense of purpose. We had the evidence, but it was all illegally obtained. Truth without a warrant is just trivia in a courtroom. We needed to find a way to make it all admissible. To turn our covert recon into a prosecutable case, we needed a trigger, something that would let us get a real warrant and kick down the door legally. We had poked the hornet's nest. Now we had to figure out how to get the hornets to fly out into the open, right into our trap. The evidence from the storage unit was a bombshell, but it was also a hand grenade with the pin pulled. We couldn't use it in court. If we presented it as is, any half-decent lawyer would get the entire case thrown out on a technicality, the fruit of the poisonous tree. Karen and her crew would walk, and they'd know exactly who had come after them. My quiet life would be over, and my career would be in jeopardy for conducting an off-the-books investigation. We were sitting on a mountain of truth that we couldn't use. Gina, Davis, and I huddled in my garage, the photos from the storage unit displayed on Gina's laptop screen. The faces of Karen Truman and Barry the treasurer stared back at us from the forged documents. "We need a legal entry point," Davis said, rubbing his tired eyes. "A piece of evidence we obtained by the book. One clean thread we can pull to unravel the whole thing." I knew he was right. We needed an official report, a witness, a piece of probable cause that wasn't tainted by our little break and enter. We could try to get one of the other victims to file a formal complaint, I suggested. Someone whose car was stolen. We guide them, tell them what to say, who to point the finger at. Gina shook her head. Too risky. They're just civilians. The tow company's lawyers would tear them apart on the stand, and Karen would intimidate them into silence before they even got to the station. She was right. These were not hardened criminals we were dealing with. They were scared homeowners. That's when Officer Miller called me, the rookie from the 911 ambush. He'd been calling me once a week since that morning on my porch, ostensibly to ask for advice on case files, but I knew what he was really doing. He was trying to apologize, to make things right. He was a good kid, eager and earnest, with a strong sense of justice that hadn't been ground down by years of bureaucracy yet. "Chief," he said, his voice a little shaky over the phone. I might have something. It's probably nothing, but it's been bugging me." I motioned for Gina and Davis to be quiet. "What is it, Miller?" "Well, sir, after that call at your house, I started paying more attention to the HOA complaints, just keeping an eye out. And there's this one tow company, Reliable Roadside Recovery. Their name keeps popping up. There have been a lot of complaints about them online, too. People saying their cars were towed illegally, that the company is a ghost." I felt a chill go down my spine. The kid had stumbled right into the middle of our investigation, all on his own. "Good work, Miller. That's good instinct. But listen to me. This is bigger than it looks. I want you to stay away from it. Write up what you have and send it to me directly. Do not engage. Do you understand?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, sir. I understand." But there was something in his voice, a hesitation. The eagerness of a rookie wanting to prove himself, to crack a big case. He wanted to impress the chief who he'd almost arrested. I should have pushed harder, should have ordered him to stand down in no uncertain terms. But I didn't. That was my mistake. 2 days passed. I didn't get a report from Miller. I got busy with department budgets and a city council meeting, and I let it slip. Then on Friday night, my personal cell phone rang. It was Miller's number. "Chief." His voice was a whisper, strained and full of static. "I think I found them. The new development. Oakwood. There's a model home at the end of the cul-de-sac. They're using it as a field office. I saw one of the Reliable tow trucks pull in behind it. My blood ran cold. Miller, where are you right now? Give me your exact location and get out of there." "Now." "I'm in the trees across the street," he whispered. "I think they're moving a car. A blue sedan. The license plate is." The line went dead. I called back immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I swore, slamming my fist on the garage workbench. Gina was already at her computer, her face a pale, grim mask. His phone's GPS is still active. He's at the new construction site, but he's not moving. The timer started. Every cop knows that feeling. The moment a situation turns from an investigation into a rescue. The moment the clock starts ticking on one of your own. All the careful planning, all the off-the-book secrecy, it was all out the window. One of my officers was in trouble. My officer, my rookie, and it was my fault. I had seen the warning signs, and I hadn't stopped him. "Davis," I barked into the phone. Meet me at the Oakwood construction site entrance on Mill Road. 10 minutes. No sirens, no radio. Come alone. I hung up before he could answer. I grabbed the heavy-duty mag light from the workbench. It was solid steel and felt reassuringly heavy in my hand. Gina looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, but her hands steady on the keyboard. I've got the blueprints for the model home he mentioned. The chestnut floor plan, she said, her voice all business. 2 stories for bedrooms, attached 2-car garage. I'm patching the schematics to your phone now. I'll stay on comms. I nodded, giving her hand a quick squeeze. Keep an eye on his GPS. If he moves from that spot, you tell me. Immediately. As I ran out the door, my mind was racing. This was the legal entry point we needed, but it was the worst possible kind. Officer missing. It was a blank check. I could call in the entire department, SWAT, helicopters, the works. But that would be a circus. The crew inside that model home would hear us coming a mile away, and Miller's life would be forfeit. We had to go in quiet. We had to go in fast. The careful, methodical chess match with Karen Truman was over. Someone had knocked over the board. Now it was just a street fight in the dark, and one of my men was the prize. The drive to the Oakwood construction site was the longest 5 minutes of my life. The new development was a ghost town after dark, a skeleton of half-finished houses and muddy roads. Streetlights weren't installed yet, so the only illumination came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. Davis was waiting for me at the entrance as promised, parked in his unmarked sedan. He got out as I pulled up, his face set like stone. He was holding a tire iron. Thought this might be more appropriate than my service weapon, he said grimly. Keeps things quiet. I nodded in agreement. A gunshot would bring the whole world down on us before we had the rookie. Gina says he's in the model home at the end of the street. The chestnut, I said, pulling up the floor plan on my phone. She's feeding us intel. Let's go. We ditched our cars and moved on foot, sticking to the shadows cast by the skeletal frames of future houses. The air was filled with the smell of cut lumber and damp earth. The model home was the only finished structure on the street. It was lit up like a Christmas tree, a beacon of false welcome in the middle of a dark, muddy field. A single black tow truck, the reliable roadside recovery, logo barely visible on its door, was parked in the driveway, angled toward the garage. 2 men, Gina's voice whispered in my earbud. I'm picking up their cell signals. One is stationary in what looks like a back bedroom on the first floor. The other is moving around the kitchen and living area. Miller's phone signal was in the same back bedroom. He was with one of the kidnappers. We crept around to the back of the house. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, but the sliding glass door leading from the kitchen to a small concrete patio was unlocked. A rookie mistake by the kidnappers. They felt safe out here, isolated and alone. We were about to prove them wrong. Davis and I slipped inside, silent as ghosts. The house smelled of new paint and cheap carpet. We were in a generic, staged kitchen with plastic fruit in a bowl on the granite countertop. From the adjoining living room, we could hear the low murmur of a television. A large man, built like a refrigerator, was sitting on a beige sofa, his back to us, watching some action movie. He had a can of beer in one hand. This was our moving target. Davis and I exchanged a look. I pointed to myself, then to the thug. Davis nodded and pointed down the hall toward the back bedroom. We split up. I moved across the plush carpet, my footsteps making no sound. The thug on the couch was completely engrossed in the movie, chuckling at a car explosion on the screen. I was 3 feet behind him when he must have sensed something. He started to turn, his eyes widening in surprise. He surged up, shoulder first. I took the hit, pivoted, and dropped the mag light behind his ear. He grunted and slumped forward, unconscious, spilling his beer on the pristine floor. 1 down. I moved down the hallway. The door to the back bedroom was slightly ajar. I could hear voices from inside. One was a low, menacing grumble. The other was Officer Miller's, tight with pain. I'm just a cop, Miller was saying. I was just checking out a suspicious vehicle. The other voice laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You're a cop who knows too much. Now you're just going to sit tight until our boss decides what to do with you. And he hates waiting, the man said, tapping a pistol against the chair Miller was in. I peeped through the crack in the door. Miller was tied to a chair in the middle of the empty room. His face was bruised, and there was a trickle of blood from his lip. A wiry thug paced back and forth, waving a pistol. Davis came up behind me, silent as smoke. He'd seen the gun too. We couldn't just rush in. A single panicked shot could kill Miller. We needed a distraction. I looked around the hallway. On a small table was a decorative vase full of fake flowers. It was perfect. I caught Davis's eye and pointed at the vase, then at the wall opposite the bedroom door. He understood immediately. He picked up the vase and on my silent count of 3, he hurled it against the wall. The vase shattered with a deafening crash. The wiry thug in the bedroom yelled in surprise. What was that? Stay here, he shouted at Miller. And then he made his fatal mistake. He moved toward the door to see what the noise was, stepping right into our trap. The second his head poked out into the hallway, I kicked the door in. It flew open, slamming him against the wall. The gun flew from his hand, clattering across the hardwood floor. Davis was on him in an instant, a knee in his back, cuffing his hands behind him. The fight was over before it really began. It was short, brutal, and clean. I rushed to Miller, cutting him loose with a knife from my pocket. You okay, kid? I asked, helping him to his feet. He was shaky but resolute. I'm fine, Chief. They got my weapon and my radio. He looked at the 2 unconscious or restrained thugs. How did you? We'll talk about it later, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. Right now, you're the victim of a kidnapping. You were checking on a suspicious vehicle. You were ambushed and you called for backup. Understand? He nodded, the official story locking into place in his mind. This was our legal entry. We had a victim officer, 2 suspects in custody, and probable cause to search the entire property. The warrant followed fast. An on-call judge signed it as soon as Miller was safe. Davis came over, holding up the pistol he'd recovered. Standard issue Glock. Serial numbers are filed off. He then held up a wallet he'd taken from the wiry thug. The driver's license inside belonged to a known associate of a local crime family, a specialist in car theft. These weren't just some rough tow truck drivers. These were professional criminals. Karen Truman and her little HOA scam had gotten into bed with some very dangerous people. She thought she was a queen ruling her little suburban kingdom. She had no idea she was just a pawn in a much larger, much more violent game. And by kidnapping one of my officers, her partners had just declared war on the entire police department. The rescue of Officer Miller was the crack in the dam. Everything we had gathered in the shadows could now be brought into the light, legitimized by a lawful investigation into the kidnapping of a police officer. Within an hour, the model home was swarming with forensics teams and detectives. I stepped back, letting Sergeant Davis take the official lead. To the rest of the department, I was just the chief on scene to oversee the investigation into an assault on one of my men. Only Davis, Gina, and I knew the real story. The 2 thugs we arrested were small-time muscle, and they weren't talking. They lawyered up immediately, which was expected. But their silence didn't matter. They were just the appetizer. Their presence at the model home gave us the legal justification we needed to get warrants for everything. And that's when Gina truly went to work. It was a montage of justice in the making. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold as she orchestrated the entire digital investigation from her command center. First came the warrants for the model home and the tow truck office, signed before sunrise. The search of the model home turned up Miller's stolen service weapon and a stash of burner phones. The search of Reliable Roadside Recovery's supposed office, a dingy room above a laundromat, yielded a treasure trove, logbooks, GPS trackers from the trucks, and most importantly, a desktop computer. Gina sliced through the computer's password protection in under 5 minutes. They used password 123, she said with a dismissive shake of her head. Amateurs. On the hard drive, she found the originals, the templates for the fake HOA violation notices, the forged tow authorizations, and a detailed spreadsheet of every vehicle they had stolen over the past year. complete with notes on where the cars were sold or what parts were harvested. It was a complete confession in digital form. One work order even listed Oakwood's project code in the memo. Next, she used the evidence from the computer to get a warrant for the HOA's main office. I sent Davis and a uniformed team to execute it. They seized computers, filing cabinets, and the office printer. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I called in a favor from the head of our forensic lab. I need a toner analysis, I told him. Compare the toner from the HOA's printer with the toner from the fake violation notices we've been collecting. The call came back 3 hours later. It's a perfect match, Chief. Not just the same brand, the exact same chemical batch. These notices were printed on that machine. We now had a direct physical link between the criminal conspiracy and Karen Truman's office. But the final nail in the coffin came from the money. Armed with the tow company spreadsheet and the receipt book we'd photographed in the storage unit, we got a warrant for the bank records of the HOA, Oakwood Development, Karen Truman, and the treasurer, Barry Jenkins. Gina, who used to do freelance work in forensic accounting, lit up. She spent a day mapping the flow of money. It was a beautiful, simple, and utterly damning picture. Oakwood Development would make large lump sum payments to the HOA for community improvement projects. Most of that money would go into the HOA's general fund, but a small, specific percentage, always 15%, would be siphoned off by Barry Jenkins into a separate account. From that account, he would make regular cash withdrawals. The dates and amounts of those withdrawals matched the cash payments to the tow ring enforcers perfectly. And then there was the icing on the cake, a series of direct bank transfers from Barry's slush fund to a personal account belonging to Karen Truman. The memo line on each transfer was the same, consulting fee. She was getting a cut, a big one. She wasn't just a puppet, Gina said, spinning in her chair to face me. She was a willing partner. She provided the legal cover and the targets. Barry cooked the books, and the developer's thugs did the dirty work. And they all got rich. We had it all. Ringcam clips, toner match, hard drive originals, bank transfers. We could prove the entire chain of command from the muscle on the street all the way up to Karen. We had enough to put them all away for a very long time on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, grand theft auto, and, thanks to Miller, kidnapping. But there was one thing that still bothered me. George, Karen's sniveling, entitled son. His name wasn't on any of the bank records. He wasn't in any of the logbooks. He was a ghost. Yet, I knew with a gut certainty that only comes from 30 years of police work that he was the key. His desire for my car was the spark that started this whole fire. Karen was ruthless and greedy, but she was also a doting mother. I suspected this whole scheme wasn't just about the money for her. It was about giving her worthless son everything he ever wanted, including a classic muscle car he didn't deserve. The case was solid, but I wanted them caught in the act, and I wanted the neighborhood to see it. And I knew there was only one thing that would draw both Karen and George out into the open. One thing they couldn't resist: my dad's car. I looked over at Gina. They've tried to steal my car twice now and failed. I think it's time we let them succeed. The idea of using my dad's car as bait felt like a betrayal. It was the last pure thing he'd left me, and I was about to roll it into a den of thieves. But it was the cleanest way to do this, to catch their hands in the cookie jar on tape. I wanted to see the look on her face when the trap sprung. This had gone far beyond a simple criminal case. For me, it had become a question of moral certainty. When do you accept that some people are just too far gone? Karen had answered that for me. Now I needed to provide the consequences. Gina understood what I was feeling. She came and stood behind me in the garage, placing a hand on my shoulder as I stared at the car under its cover. Your dad would understand, Frank, she said softly. He'd want you to use it to protect people like Tony. It's just metal and paint. What he gave you, the important part, is inside you. She was right. Of course, she always was. The car wasn't the memory, it was just a container for it. All right, I said, my voice hoarse. Let's wire it up. The plan was simple, but it had to be executed perfectly. We couldn't use standard police department equipment. It was too bulky, too easy to spot. This required Gina's delicate touch. For the next 2 nights, We worked in the garage with the door shut and the lights low. Gina, with her slender fingers and a jeweler's set of tools, performed surgery on the Mustang's dashboard. She installed a micro GPS tracker, no bigger than a dime, inside the speedometer housing. It was powered directly by the car's battery, so it would never die. Next came the audio. She carefully removed the original AM radio from the dash. It was a heavy, obsolete piece of metal. Behind it, she mounted a state-of-the-art voice-activated microphone with a cellular transmitter. It's military grade, she explained, carefully soldering a wire. It can distinguish between engine noise and human speech. It will broadcast a crystal-clear audio feed directly to a secure server. As the owner, I consented, and we would seek a monitoring order once the kidnapping case officially opened. We would be able to hear every word they said inside that car. I watched her work, a mix of pride and anxiety churning in my gut. She was a genius, a ghost in the machine who could bend technology to her will. While she handled the tech, I handled the bait. I knew I couldn't just leave the car on the street with the keys in it. That would be entrapment. I had to make them think they were getting away with something, that they were outsmarting me. I needed a pretense. The annual HOA Gala was in 3 days. It was the biggest social event of the year in our little community, held in a large tent on the community green. The theme was building our future, and the guest of honor was the CEO of Oakwood Development. It was the perfect stage. I started a rumor. I told neighbor Tony, knowing he was the neighborhood's most efficient gossip network, that I was finally giving up. I told him this HOA pressure was too much and that I'd be putting the Mustang up for sale after the weekend. I let him see me taking pictures of it with my phone as if preparing an online ad. I even printed a for sale sign and tucked it under the windshield wiper with a fake phone number that routed to a burner phone on my desk. The bait was laid. I was counting on George's impatience and Karen's arrogance. I was betting they wouldn't wait for me to sell it. They'd want to take it, to rub my nose in their victory. The day of the gala, I made my final move. I accidentally left the garage door open a few inches when I left to run errands. Tucked just inside, barely visible from the street, was a spare key to the Mustang hanging on a magnetic hook. It was a rookie mistake, something a stressed-out homeowner trying to sell a car might do. It was an invitation. Karen's emails, which we would later subpoena, showed the plan was to call it a community donation, then bill her insurance for the loss. She'd even drafted the press blurb for the donation. That night, we got ready for the gala. I put on a suit that felt tight in the shoulders, and Gina wore a simple black dress that made her look like a spy in a Bond movie. As we were about to leave, Sergeant Davis arrived in uniform. He wouldn't be attending the party. He and a hand-picked team of 4 plainclothes officers would be our backup, parked in an unmarked van a block away, monitoring our comms. "The stage is set, Chief," he said, handing me a small, discreet earpiece. "We're ready." I looked at Gina. "Ready for this?" She smiled, a flash of the fierce woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "They have no idea what's coming," she said. We walked out the door and headed toward the gala, leaving my house, my garage, and my father's car vulnerable. It felt like walking into a battle unarmed. But we weren't unarmed. Our weapons were just smaller. They were microphones, GPS trackers, and the enemy's own arrogance. We were about to watch them walk witlessly and willingly right into the center of a web we had so carefully built. The night of the HOA Gala was dark and stormy. A heavy autumn rain drummed against the roof of the massive white tent on the community green, muffling the sounds of the bad jazz trio playing inside. It was the perfect weather for a sting. The rain would keep most people from wandering around outside, and the noise would cover our movements. We slipped into the packed tent, full of neighbors in their shiniest outfits. At the head table, holding court, was Karen Truman. She was wearing a sparkling silver dress, looking every bit the queen of her domain. Next to her, looking smug and self-satisfied, was the CEO of Oakwood Development. Barry, the treasurer, was there too, sweating in his oversized tuxedo and avoiding eye contact with everyone. George was nowhere to be seen. That was a good sign. Gina and I got drinks and blended into the crowd, positioning ourselves near one of the main tent poles where we had a clear view of the stage and the entrance. My earpiece was silent. Gina had her phone in her hand, disguised as if she were just checking her messages, but I knew she was monitoring the live feed from the Mustang's GPS. The car was still in my garage. The trap hadn't been sprung yet. The waiting was the hardest part. For an hour, we mingled. We listened to Karen give a self-congratulatory speech about the neighborhood's success, thanking Oakwood Development for their generous partnership. It was all I could do not to laugh. Then, my earpiece crackled to life. It was Gina, her voice low and steady, even though she was standing right next to me. It was a direct feed from her phone to me. "We have movement," she said. "The garage door sensor just tripped. Someone's inside." My heart started pounding. I took a slow sip of my water, keeping my face a mask of bored indifference. "GPS is active," she continued. "The car is moving. It's pulling out of the driveway." I scanned the room. Karen was still at the head table, but she kept glancing at her phone, a tight little smile on her face. She was in on it. She was coordinating it. "They're on the road," Gina whispered. "Heading this way." The plan was in motion. Now all we had to do was wait for the delivery. 10 minutes later, Karen tapped the microphone on the podium, calling for everyone's attention. And now for a very special surprise, she announced, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "Our partners at Oakwood Development believe so strongly in this community that they wanted to make a special donation. A new vehicle for our security patrol." As if on cue, the tent flaps at the main entrance were pulled back. The headlights of a car cut through the rainy darkness. And then my dad's 1969 Boss 429, its candy apple red paint gleaming under the gala lights, rolled slowly and majestically into the tent. Behind the wheel, grinning from ear to ear, was George Truman. A gasp went through the crowd. My neighbors knew that car. They'd seen it in my driveway for months. They looked from the car to me, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. I kept my expression neutral. This was the moment of truth. "Let's give a hand to George Truman," Karen said, applauding loudly, for securing this wonderful donation for our community. This was her story. Her clever son had convinced the new guy to donate his car. She was trying to spin the theft into a triumph. That's when Gina made her move. She lifted her phone and tapped the screen once. As per the judge's order, the audio from inside the Mustang, a conversation between George on the speakerphone and Karen, poured through the tense sound system. Her own words filled the room. "Karen, on recording, he's at the gala. The key is on the hook. It's just a community donation now." The crowd fell silent. Karen's smile froze, the color draining from her face. I gave her a small, cold smile of my own. That mic, I thought, picks up lies in stereo. George, still sitting in the driver's seat of the idling Mustang, looked terrified. Crowd gasps. Karen goes pale. Karen, stammering, that's out of context. "He's lying." Frank, calmly, "The mic doesn't lie, Karen." Then, play George's audio from the car, making him sound even more entitled. "My mom was right. Just have to take what you want. This is gonna look so good in my driveway." Panic erupted. The CEO from Oakwood Development was already trying to slip out a side entrance, but he was met by two of Davis's plainclothes officers who calmly but firmly escorted him back inside. George, in a complete panic, stomped on the gas. The 429 V8 roared to life, its tires spinning on the slick vinyl floor. The car lunged toward the head table. I didn't hesitate. I ran forward, vaulting over a table of hors d'oeuvres, and put myself directly in the car's path. I knew the car, I knew George didn't. He wouldn't know how to handle that much power. The car fishtailed wildly. I reached the driver's side door, wrenched it open, and grabbed George by the collar of his ridiculous tuxedo shirt. I hauled him out of the driver's seat and threw him onto the ground. The car, driverless, stalled and rolled to a stop, its chrome bumper inches from Karen's podium. The tent was in chaos, but then the main flaps opened again. Sergeant Davis walked in, followed by 4 uniformed officers. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the tent. The party was officially over. Davis walked straight to Karen. "Karen Truman," he said, his voice booming through the silent tent. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, insurance fraud, and grand theft auto." As the cuffs clicked onto her wrists, her composure finally broke. She started to cry. Not tears of remorse, but tears of pure, undiluted rage at being caught. Davis's officers arrested a sputtering Barry Jenkins. I picked George up off the floor and handed him over to another officer. "And this one is all yours," I said. The neighbors were all standing there, their mouths open, watching the pillars of their community being led away in handcuffs. My dad's car sat there, idling and safe, the silent, chrome-covered star of the whole show. The aftermath was swift. With Karen, George, and Barry cuffed, the house of cards collapsed. Barry, faced with the mountain of evidence, took one look at the file and sang like a canary. He laid out the entire scheme. The HOA fines were used to mark targets, Reliable Roadside was contracted to yank the cars, and Oakwood Development laundered them into their fleet. In return, the board members got their palms greased with cash, and Karen got her pet projects fast-tracked through city permits. It was a closed-loop system of corruption, now open and shut. The developer, a man used to steamrolling city halls and small-town councils, folded the moment he heard the word racketeering. He handed over ledgers, emails, and text messages, anything to lessen his own sentence. Karen, proud and defiant to the bitter end, refused a plea deal, convinced she could charm a jury. The jury listened to the gala audio, saw the bank trails, and needed less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. She got 10 years. George, framed by his lawyer as a coddled and manipulated follower, landed 5 years of probation and a hefty amount of community service. The public humiliation, however, seemed to stick harder than any legal sentence. The neighborhood, free from its tyrant, got its spine back. A judge put the HOA into receivership. Court-appointed auditors went through the books, tracing every fake fine and every lost vehicle. A restitution fund, paid for by the seized assets of Oakwood Development, paid everyone back for their tools, their trucks, and their dignity. Tony rolled up to my house one Saturday in a brand new pickup, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Coffee's on me," he said. "And donuts, if you're twisting my arm." I took the coffee. We held a special election for a new HOA board. No tyrants, just neighbors. Tony became the new president. His first motion was to nuke Section 8.3C from the bylaws. The non-operational vehicle rule went into history's shredder. Block parties replaced the culture of peering through binoculars. We started saying hello again. It became a community. A few weeks later, Gina and I stood in the garage. The boss sat there, quiet and red and perfect. On the workbench was the title that had been trapped in legal limbo while the case was active. My dad had signed it over years ago, but I hadn't finished the job. Gina handed me a pen. "It's time, Frank." I looked at my father's name, the slope of the letters I knew by heart. For a long time, I'd avoided signing that line as if writing my name next his meant saying a final goodbye. It didn't. It meant carrying on. I signed, Frank Dillon. Gina smiled. Now it's official. A weight I didn't even know I was still carrying slid off my shoulders. I looked at the car. My car. Our car. "Let's tackle that carburetor," I said. First step, I added with a grin, "I'll get a certain young man on probation to teach me what a torque wrench is." Gina snorted. "Community service can handle that. He can detail it." She tapped the newly signed title. "Just make sure he torques everything to spec," she said, "unlike their bylaws." The silence we moved here for finally returned. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was earned. And if Karen's ghost ever wondered what became of her little kingdom, the answer was simple. It became a neighborhood.